we must be cognizant, as myself and Minister Young, who are candidates, and all candidates, regardless of your political party, whether you're one of the two main parties or one of the smaller parties, it doesn't matter. The same rules apply. And what we would like to spend a minute or two discussing this morning are the public health measures that parties, candidates, campaign managers, activists should adopt in their walkabouts and in their cottage meetings. So whether it's a congregation in Woodford Square, Harris Promenade, or in Scarborough, Tobago, the number still remains at 25. So on your walks, in your cottage meetings, in your virtual meetings, please have an audience of no more than 25. We also ask, regardless of whether it's a political activity or not, if you have 25 persons, that they be masked and try to employ as much social distancing as humanly possible. If, however, you are engaging in political activities where more than 25 persons are with you, example in a walk, it's very simple. Let's say you have 40 persons, put them in two groups of 20 and have one person managing each group. If you have 75 persons, put them in three groups of 25 and space them out. But also ensure that they wear masks. I think if we do this, we as potential leaders of this country post-August 20th, the country is looking to every one of us for leadership. Every one of us. Every political party, every candidate is a potential leader. And the country is looking for us for leadership, and we need to set the example. So I'm hoping this little reminder of what the public health measures are, and when you are walking, also walk with hand sanitizers. That will go a very long way. I do it. Sanitize your hands as often as humanly possible. Make sure that everyone who has to cough and sneeze coughs into the crook of their elbows. Make sure that you don't kiss. Make sure that you don't touch your face. You don't touch your eyes. You don't touch your noses, and so on. So don't let COVID hinder your political activities, but it is part of the new normal moving forward. So just a cautionary word to all political parties, all campaign managers, and all candidates to adopt the simple public health measures as we move forward. So, Minister Cox, I want to thank you for the few minutes.
Thank you very much, Minister. The Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Roshan Parasram, will provide us with a clinical update. Dr. Parasram.
Good morning, Honorable Ministers, members of the media, members of the viewing and listening public. The clinical update for Saturday, July 11, 2020 is as follows. The number of samples submitted to the Caribbean Public Health Agency and the University of the West Indies Lab, 5,787. The number of unique patient tests completed, 4,336. Number of repeated samples thus far, 1,451. Number of samples that tested positive remain at 133. And the number of deaths remain at 8. Number of discharges are now at 120. And there are 5 persons warded at the Cora Health Facility, all in stable condition. The number of community tests that were conducted thus far in the public sector, 2,059, all negative. The number in the private sector as of yesterday, Friday, the 10th of July, 1,507. So the aggregate for both private and public sector in terms of community testing now stands at 3,566, all of them being negative. So the total number of persons remaining quarantined at various facilities stands now at 99, with the discharge of the 290 individuals. These persons are dispersed throughout various facilities. The first facility, UED Penal Campus, 26 individuals. The Chancellor Hotel, there are 19. At the Napa, which houses the healthcare workers, we have 21. The Cascadia Hotel, there are 18. Vision on Mission, there are 15. And they are due for discharge later today, as all of them would have received their negative tests yesterday, I believe. The pending, in terms of persons coming in, we're still looking towards 62 persons from Grenada and 50 from Canada in a short period of time. Minister Cox, that's my clinical update for today.
This time, the Minister of National Security, the Honourable Stuart Young, will deal with the public health regulations and borders. Minister Young.
Thank you very much, Minister Cox. Good morning to my cabinet colleagues, Minister Cox, Minister Dial Singh, to the Chief Medical Officer, to the wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago, and to members of the media. I've come here this morning just to give an update with respect to the borders and exemptions with respect to our borders, but also to deal with some of the mischief that has been circulating out there in the public domain by certain individuals who should, quite frankly, know better. First of all, on behalf of the government, I'd like to let every national of ours who is outside of Trinidad and Tobago, trying to make their way back to Trinidad and Tobago, once again to emphasize with you all that the government are very, very aware of the difficulties and the inconvenience, more so the difficulties of your circumstances. We have a lot of empathy with you, and I'll get to the numbers in a short while. We've made it very, very clear that the way we are dealing with exemptions and the re-entry of persons into Trinidad and Tobago, our nationals, is based on a number of factors, and in particular, and most importantly, our public healthcare system and its ability to safely quarantine people. There is no doubt that the closing of the border on the 23rd of March to our nationals has played one of the most critical factors in allowing our population in Trinidad and Tobago to be living the type of lives that we're living currently on a daily basis. Due to us as a government doing two things: always taking the advice and listening very carefully to the scientific and medical expert advice of our medical public healthcare experts, and then also with respect to the borders, providing that level of control and managing the quarantine numbers. So it is a constant management of the numbers of persons who are in quarantine, and we're not leaving any space in between. Understand, as a batch of persons come out of quarantine, there must be a short airing out process. We've shortened that as much as we can, and we've also expanded on every single opportunity the state's ability to state quarantine, and also now offer this second category of state supervised quarantine at some facilities. The regulations. The second thing that have assisted us in being in the state that we are is persons. Our regulations were always based on the expert scientific evidence of our medical healthcare experts, and the regulations were followed greatly by the population of Trinidad and Tobago. These two factors have us in the state that we're in today, and we should not, quite frankly, take it for granted. I've seen it suggested that the government should not be observing what is going on in neighboring jurisdictions on this side of the Western Hemisphere and across the Atlantic pond. And we should really not focus on countries such as what may be happening in the United States, in the United Kingdom, some other European countries. Anybody following this globally would see what has happened in Sweden and some of these other countries. That would be very irresponsible of your government not to be aware of what is going on. So on March 23rd, the borders were closed to our nationals, and we are going to continue with our border control as it is. We've been carefully managing the return of nationals. The numbers do depend on our quarantine facilities and the ability of our healthcare system. Even if we have our state quarantine facilities and state supervised facilities up to maximum capacity, we are always planning that suppose now in one batch of repatriated nationals there's an outbreak of the virus amongst them, does that then spill over to our parallel healthcare system? And we always have to balance those figures and numbers. At National Security, we have a system where we have dated the dates of the exemptions that people have made and various categories of persons. As I said, we have always been seeking ways to expand our ability to quarantine. So recently, you would have seen we were able to take on hundreds of cruise ship workers because we negotiated with one of the cruise ship companies to utilize one of their ships for the quarantine of over 300 people. We've been doing the same thing in oil and gas, allowing us to quarantine hundreds of people by the use of rigs and the use of ships outside of there, thus increasing our capacity and our ability to bring persons home. With our state supervised quarantine facilities, I'm happy to say we've added yet another hotel to it. It is a hotel that is not surrounded by the general population. It's not in a residential area, and it's up in the Piarco area. So that now has come on board and is part of our phase process going forward. there is a science behind what is being done. So I'd like to start off by just saying that to date, we have granted approximately 4,515 exemptions for persons to come home. So I think people have missed this point, that to date, from the 23rd of March, we've granted 4,515 exemptions of persons to come home. You all would recall some of these stories. I don't need to get into it. Some who have come back from Barbados, Suriname, Guyana, and other Caribbean countries, or UE students repatriated from Jamaica, from Barbados, or Cuban students arrived this week, along with persons from St. Martin. So where we are now today is we have allowed 4,515 exemptions of persons to come home. And I'll deal in a short while with the political mischief by the opposition and the suggestion as to how these numbers may be so. What I'd like to do is provide you with an update. The CMO's figures are slightly off because we have increased the numbers of persons that we hope to bring into Trinidad within the next week. We're going to have potentially, it started off at around 69 persons in Grenada. It is not, yesterday morning it moved up to 72. Today we're granting exemptions to 79 persons from Grenada, and that will take place this week. The next two countries, the big areas that we're looking at bringing back people and currently working on, and the exemptions would have started to have gone out overnight, are Canada and the United Kingdom, Europe and Middle East. So Canada is one category, being a country, the United Kingdom, Europe and the Middle East. I emphasize that unfortunately, as much as we would love to, everybody in those jurisdictions bring them home, due to the numbers and the size of the numbers of persons who are there, we can't bring everyone home at the same time. So we've gone through a process. It is a very principled policy and process, and overnight persons in Canada and then also some persons in the United Kingdom, Europe and the Middle East would have started to have received the exemptions and the approvals to come home, and we await those persons as the next batch. Immediately, the figures that we've worked there are going to take us well up to over 200 persons. What we've also introduced in the email to these people is an offer. Kindly indicate whether you're prepared to go into, at your own cost, state supervised quarantine. As I say, we've brought on another hotel, or whether you require state quarantine where the state will pay for everything. And we're not putting pressure on anybody either way. But what it does, and what we will then analyze, is persons, and there may be families involved, not there may be, there are a lot of families involved with small children in these categories from Canada, Europe, United Kingdom, and the Middle East. If they take up the state quarantine facilities, i.e. that is in a hotel, then it provides us with a little bit more room to expand. But of course, we're still constrained because we're always planning. If there is an outbreak amongst those persons, we've avoided community spread. And I'd just like to make that point very quickly. What you saw going on recently with the return of the cruise ship workers and others who tested positively was a re-importation of the COVID virus into Trinidad and Tobago. Could we imagine if we did not take this very, very robust approach to quarantine, and persons were just allowed to go home and to self-isolate or quarantine at home, and there was an outbreak of community spread? It is the government's decision, based on the advice of our medical experts, to ensure that every national returning is quarantined by the state, or state-supervised quarantine in specific places, that has prevented, so far, any community spread from taking place. This is the science behind it. And we do have a lot of empathy for all of our nationals who are outside there. I see it, I hear it constantly. I hear the pleas, the cries of everyone. So those are the three big categories that are happening. We are also looking at the United States. I have been in contact with the United States government because recently this week you all would have seen a decision taken domestically in the United States with respect to persons on student visas. The United States government has assured me that where it applies is only to students who have no physical class. If you have one credit, that's a physical class, then your visa, your student visa, still is applicable in the United States. It's only for universities and schools that have gone 100% online. We are also looking, I'm looking for additional facilities along with the Ministry of Health to see how we can deal with our students away, because we are aware of how difficult it is for them. But they're also the elderly, the sick, those with families, those with children. We've had a lot of people who've gone abroad and given birth abroad and want to return. We are looking at this. United States, and just to give you all an idea, of the most recent and up-to-date figures. As at this morning, we have over 4,000 applications of persons that have come in. And those applications, of course, may include multiple persons. The breakdown for the incoming applications that we currently have, I've told you we've granted 4,500 exemptions. In the United States alone, we're well over 1,000. And then we have the breakdown of the other areas that we're trying our best to get persons back from. So after we go through these 3 big categories that I've identified, and during this period of time, we are going to be looking at how we can deal with our nationals in the United States. Another phenomenon that has turned up is we're seeing people only now applying for exemptions. Of course, what that seems to indicate is that persons who have been living in the United States, who are domiciled in the United States, working, making their lives there, may now have lost their jobs, etc., and want to come home. Of course, the priority will be given to our nationals who applied since the 23rd of March, come forward on a date basis, and those with your circumstances. So we are working assiduously towards that. It is always dictated by the numbers. I'd just like to use the opportunity, Minister Cox, just to say those persons who are seeking exemptions to enter Trinidad and Tobago, kindly send your applications to travel exempt, one word, TRAVEL, exemption, travel exemption, TRAVELEXEMPTION at MNS, Ministry of National Security.gov.tt. Those who are seeking to leave, let me just talk briefly about that. Everyone who is seeking to leave Trinidad and Tobago, you are being granted the approval to leave. Of course, you have to arrange your travel arrangements, but now as we start to send some flights up and allow some flights up, hopefully that will be able to work out. So for exemptions to leave, it is depart exemption, one word, DEPART exemption, EXEMPTION, one word, at mns.gov.tt. And there's now a separate process dealing with that. When I met with the staff, and I'd like to thank all of them at National Security who have been dealing with these thousands of applications and taking phone calls from persons, so as they share their stories with me, and I am subject to it as well, of persons who are understandably anxious to get home. I have one plea by my staff, and it really was a little disparaging to hear what they told me. They say that some persons are asking them and offering them bribes in this process. They've asked me to please ask any person to desist. We simply don't work that way at the Ministry of National Security, in particular with this exemption process. So if there's any mischief there, please desist. I've actually told them to take the information of persons who are making those offers, and we'll pass that information to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. I'll just end on this note, because we must unfortunately respond to some of the political attacks and rhetoric outside there. This week we had the leader of the opposition suggesting that at the Ministry of National Security, we're allowing PNM people, PNM persons to come in. There is absolutely no truth to that, and that is rejected outright. It is very, very irresponsible, but not surprising for the opposition and from the leader of the opposition to be launching this attack on this process. Everything about this process is to protect the population of 1.4 million people here in Trinidad and Tobago. As we've said, we've brought in 4,515 other people, and we continue to expand our ability. The leader of the opposition's rhetoric and irresponsible behavior is rejected outright. But I remind the population, it's not surprising, when the government took the decision, the difficult decisions, but the right decisions to protect the population and put in place public health regulations based on COVID, and we shut down bars and restaurants. You would recall that the leader of the opposition and her parliamentarians were screaming early in March for the bars to be open. Of course, the spread of this virus is via congregation and that type of behavior. The government will continue to do all that it has to do, and this is all about the management of risk. We're opening up more to the management of risk. We are adding additional facilities. But we will not be irresponsible, and we will not give in to these irresponsible screams and shouts of the leader of the opposition and others. We are not going to allow it, the control to be lost, and for us to lose all of the benefits of the hard work you, the population of Trinidad and Tobago, have worked so hard to to ensure that we have a safer Trinidad and Tobago. And I end by saying this. Each application is considered on a case-by-case basis and will continue to be considered on a case-by-case basis. We are seeing what has happened to other countries, and we as your responsible government, listening to the advice of our experts, will not allow that to happen to us here in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much, Minister Cox.
Thank you very much, Minister. Just want to say to the viewing and listening audience, we are having some technical difficulties. We have lost the members of the media, but I will ask some of their questions. We've sent to them to find out what are their questions. I know that TDT is working on it. I believe this question is for the CMO, and this is from Vern, 91.9. What is the state of availability of the nebulizer at the hospital? They got some reports on air from someone who said that they were unable to access the nebulizer as an asthma patient yesterday.
Okay, so I have been in contact with the heads of A&E throughout the country, and my advice is that I'm not, there's no shortage in that regard. However, if there's a particular instance of that occurring, I don't know if it is in Tobago, please get the specific details to me as soon as possible, and we will make all efforts to look into the matter and rectify that situation.
The second question from 91.9 is, and I believe this is for the Minister of National Security, when will persons in the United States be repatriated or allowed exemptions?
Thank you very much, Minister Cox. We understand the difficulty. As I said a short while ago, it's now well over 1,000 applications, and that is expounded and expanded by numbers. It's thousands of persons. We are looking towards it. As I've tried to explain time and time again, the process depends on our ability to quarantine persons here in Trinidad and Tobago. Every national must be quarantined under state supervision or in state quarantine. Right now we're dealing with the further away places, the UK, Europe, the Middle East and some of these areas, and Canada. We are looking at the United States, and I'm hoping that within the next week we'll start to be able to make announcements with respect to the United States. We understand how difficult it is. It is really heartbreaking and heart-wrenching to read the applications and the difficulties that our nationals are suffering outside there. It is not an easy task whatsoever, and every single one of them, our heart goes out to them, and we are looking at it. As soon, if I can expand the facilities, especially on the student side, because they can survive in different types of facilities like the UE campus halls and this type of thing, we will do so. It is something we're looking at, and hopefully we'll be able to put on maybe another hotel into the state supervised quarantine system, and that will allow us to expand. But the United States is next.
Minister Cox, if you would allow me to ask Minister Young to further expand, if he could, or repeat the issue about students in the United States on their particular type of visa and what the United States is allowing with online courses or physical courses, because I had a constituent come to me about that.
It's a lot. I mean, a lot of our students are fortunate through scholarships and other ways to be studying in the United States. I am by no means an expert or a representative of the United States government, but I've been in very close contact with them. We've been sharing information. The embassy down here has been very, very helpful as we have discussions. What they explained to me is that the student visas continue to be okay in the United States. It is only if a student is now in a situation where all of their courses, every single course, every single credit is being carried out online, then they would be asked to leave the United States. What I've also seen following it is some universities, some schools, some colleges are putting on classes for students where they would be offering just a couple credits, and that then qualifies them to stay there.
Okay.
So each student's circumstances will be based on what their university or their school is offering. They'd have to speak to their school about it. But as I understand it, it's only if all of your teaching is 100% online, you'd be asked to leave. So I understand that it brought a lot of anxiety, a lot of panic, reading the email applications of parents and them pleading with me and telling me that you, sir, are a parent. Yes, I am, and it is not an easy thing. I too am affected. Everybody on this table, everyone in our government, you've heard the Prime Minister. I mean, he reminded me in my conversations with him this week, he has his daughter that he hasn't seen for months that is in New York. Not once did he ask or inquire about exemption. He has very close family as well out in California. Wow, there, California is now the second worst state. I have family in Houston, Texas. It breaks my heart when I have to be communicating with them and corresponding. And so we all understand, and especially those nationals who are out there. And I guarantee you, I give you the assurance that at National Security, we are doing everything we can to try and get people home as quickly as possible. But it is all guided by a protection of the population in Trinidad and Tobago, and thus expanding our quarantine facilities, which the Ministry of Health is doing a tremendous job, as well as our Defence Force, our police services and others in assisting in that area.
So just for final clarification, because constituents come to me, I'm sorry to ask it again, but I think it needs repeating. Once a course...
No, all of your courses.
Once any program that you are doing, only if it is 100% online, you have to leave. Is that correct?
And I'm not sure whether they've already declared that you have to leave, but they've indicated if 100% of your teaching is online. Every single thing is online, then your student visa may be in jeopardy and you will have to leave.
Thank you.
But the best thing to do is seek the clarity from the U.S. government through the U.S.
Or your particular university.
Correct. Or your university must know about it by now.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We're trying to utilize everything that is available to us at this point. I think we have Guardian Media Limited online.
Okay, so my first question is for the Minister of National Security. Actually, both my questions are for the Minister of National Security.
It's a bit low. Hold on. We need to hear clearly. It's a bit low.
Oh, okay. Are you hearing me better now?
Yes, a little better.
Okay, so I'm moving to a location where I can actually hear you from the phone. So my first question is the MP Barry Padarat complained that not enough social services have been given to persons who are stuck abroad. I'm hoping the Minister of National Security can just respond to that. My second question is from some scholarship students whose course has ended and campuses, I think, are closed and they're stuck outside. And they, of course, are very concerned about being returned to Trinidad and Tobago. So if what sort of comfort or information can be provided to them? I know you gave the email address, but of course these are scholarship students who, are stuck and just trying to get in as soon as possible.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for those two questions. Let me start with our students, first of all. As in that categorization, they definitely are more important than MP Padarat's complaints. The students outside, and in particular scholarship students, there are two main areas. One, I've spoken to the Minister of Education and asked the Ministry of Education, please don't put any pressure on our scholarship students. A lot of them were concerned about if they don't return on time with their government bond, etc. Obviously, in these circumstances of a global pandemic, you will not be penalized for not being able to return on time to start up your work with the government services. That's part of it. With respect to our students all over, it really flows that unfortunately, we're in a global pandemic. It is a very, very unusual. Persons would have gone their whole lifetimes and not experienced what we're experiencing in the last few months. We understand how difficult it is. Unfortunately, we still ask that you continue to shelter in place. We are looking at the ability, the opportunities, the options to see how we may be able to repatriate students or grant the exemptions for students. What it will depend on is if we can get more facilities here in Trinidad and Tobago and a number of other things. So just stay safe where you are. We are very aware of your circumstances. We're working towards it, and we will have the necessary discussions if at the time it is necessary with the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Education. With respect to what MP Padarat is complaining about, I should really be the one complaining. MP Padarat was given an exemption ages ago to come to Trinidad, and every 24 hours it seems as though there's a change in his flight details. I woke up this morning, there were 3 different emails changing flight details. So it seems as he comes closer to home, maybe he's entering and putting on his political cap and this type of thing. We are doing the best that we can do, and that is assured. I have no fear of being under a microscope for that whatsoever. He was given a lot of leeway. His daughter, who he's returning with, is not even a national of Trinidad and Tobago, but a decision was taken by their government to allow MP Padarat that opportunity, whereas other persons, as you are aware, were not allowed so he is in a category all on his own.
Thank you very much, Minister. There is a question from Lasana Liebert. The Youth Pro League, and I think this is for the CMO. The Youth Pro League football competition hopes to start this month in under 14, under 16, under 18 categories. Can they play competition under any conditions? And what about the secondary school football league, which normally starts in September? The competition starts in September. Will they get clearance to play, and can you provide any guidance? This is to the CMO.
Okay, so with regards to any activity in which children are participating before September, and as we have said time and time again, we have to recall we are in the middle of a pandemic. Things can't be as they were before. We are asking, please, that any activities related to children be held until September. With regards to the second question, as it relates to the football competition after September, I think that is a matter for Ministry of Education to determine in terms of their extracurricular activities. So I would have had a meeting earlier this week with the PS and the Chief Education Officer to discuss the guidelines going forward when school reopens in September. The Ministry of Health will send a draft guideline to them later next week, early next week, and they will then utilize that to determine if there will be extracurricular activities, which is a decision that Ministry of Education has to make, but we will give them guidelines as it relates to other activities during normal school hours.
Okay, thank you. I have Sunil on the line. Please remember to identify yourself and the media house you represent.
Yes, good morning. Good morning to the panel. Question to the Health Minister. Minister, can you give us some insight into what protocols are being looked at for voting day? I know a document is currently being prepared by the Health Ministry.
Hold on, please. We need some volume.
Oh, protocols for voting? Was it protocols for voting you were asking about? Voting day?
Yeah, can you give some insight into what protocols are being looked at? And I know a document is being prepared by the Health Ministry and the EBC. How soon would this be circulated to the public?
Okay, so I took the position last week, if you remember, as a potential candidate, I will defer all questions about voting and election day to the Chief Medical Officer, just to make sure there is no charge of conflict of interest. The Ministry of Health and the Permanent Secretary and the Chief Medical Officer have the authority to sign off on those protocols, and I will now hand over to the Chief Medical Officer to answer that particular question.
Okay, so as you recall, there was a mock station that was set up by the EBC on Tuesday afternoon, in which Ministry of Health personnel were observing in order to finalize our document, which is the Ministry of Health guidelines, to pass over to the EBC. Early on Wednesday morning, the PS and myself would have signed off on that document and sent it to the Chief Election Officer, so that it is now within the remit of the EBC to take those guidelines, as they are basically guidelines, develop their protocols for each polling station, and going forward, the EBC will have the full support of the ministry if they require any further information. However, those guidelines were already sent to the EBC, and they will be responsible for dissemination.
Industry was signed off by myself. I saw it before it went out, with the exception of this particular one to the EBC. I have not seen it, I have not asked for it, and it has been signed off by public servants, not by the Minister of Health. Thank you.
Thank you, CMO. While you're at it, there's a question concerning, from Newsday, what about voting from quarantine? Can they be considered special voters?
Yes, so they are in the guideline as a special voting category, and they will be considered. All health protocols have been laid out in that document so that EBC can be guided accordingly.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anyone online again?
Mr. Cox, I just sent you a question.
Okay, there's another question while we wait. It's a follow-up to the U.S. student visa situation. If there is someone who is being deported because of this situation, is the government giving them priority? What's being put in place in case we start seeing a wave of students being deported who can't afford charters, etc.? Minister Young?
Thank you very much, Minister Cox. First of all, let me just give some level of assurance. Deportation does not take place under the COVID without there being discussion between the two governments. You all would have heard the CMO remind us a short while ago that we recently had a number of persons deported by the United States government. Deportation means the government of the country where you are at is putting you out of their country. So if there is going to be that happening with the United States and they're going to be deporting any Trinidad and Tobago nationals, they will be in contact with the government and allow us the opportunity to make the type of arrangements that need to be made. So please, don't go down that fear-mongering path. There is, as I said a short while ago, I personally have been in conversation with United States government officials, the United States Embassy down here, to get an understanding of what is taking place. I've said that we're looking at expanding our ability to bring back nationals, including our students. So there's no need for this fear unnecessarily. If there are particular circumstances and the United States government is going to talk to the government of Trinidad and Tobago, despite what persons may want to try and portray, there is a very good relationship between our government and the United States government, and that continues.
Thank you. This is for the CMO. What is the status of the nationals from the enchantment of the sea?
Wow.
And what is the assurance that they remain in home quarantine?
Okay, so we had set up a robust monitoring and evaluation committee comprising the county medical officers with jurisdiction over the persons where they live, as run by the principal medical officer of epidemiology. So there's a WhatsApp chat group, and it includes the TTPS, and I must commend the TTPS for the work that they have been doing over the last few days and even before with regards to follow-up of home quarantine individuals. They have been doing a really fantastic job together with the CMOHs to ensure that all persons have been contacted, and the ones that the Ministry of Health could not contact by phone, the TTPS has actually been doing physical visits to their home. And of all the persons contacted thus far, if you recall, they were discharged last group on Tuesday afternoon. So the end of this first 7-day quarantine will be on Monday. All of them are well thus far. There are no issues at all. So the quarantine is going very well in terms of home quarantine. And we want to remind those persons that are on home quarantine, it is for the safety of the general population, yourself and your families, to remain in the quarantine. We know it is onerous and it seems onerous, but it's just for a few more days. And hopefully after those days, we will be able to have full release back into the population.
Hi, I think we have someone online. Vern?
Yes, hello, good day. Vern Extavo from 91.9.
Good day.
Morning, Vern.
Good day. All right, good day to the panel. Just wanted to find out what protection measures are being put in place for the persons who will be coming in for the CPL. Will they be quarantined at the state's expense and tested on arrival and that kind of thing? What protection can citizens feel they will get from when these players come in? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that question. Fortunately, the Honorable Prime Minister answered that in totality yesterday afternoon. So it really is just to repeat. The Cabinet took a decision to allow, through a contractual arrangement with the CPL, the continuation and the holding of the CPL tournament in Trinidad and Tobago this year. The Ministry of Health was very critical in that process. In fact, it would not have gotten this far if CPL did not agree to every single requirement and request of the Ministry of Health. It had even come to Cabinet. At Cabinet, went to the Finance and General Purposes Committee, and we went through each line item to make sure that everything the Ministry of Health, the CMO and his team required to be done, CPL agreed to. All of the persons, it's about 215 to 250 persons coming in from various areas, are going to be tested prior to coming here. They're going to be tested on arrival. They're all staying in one facility. So that's the equivalent of the state supervised quarantine, which is the Hilton Hotel. No one else would be allowed inside of there. The Ministry of Health will have authorization throughout. Everyone will be kept in their rooms in small bunches for at least 7 days. They'll be tested throughout and then start to be allowed to practice. We have very, very tight procedures in place, including persons not being allowed to leave the Hilton Hotel when they're leaving to go to practice or matches, etc. They will be guided by the Ministry of National Security, the Ministry of Health, and these types of things. So we have made sure from a health perspective, it is very, very tight. As the Prime Minister said, the CPL are paying for all of this as well. And what it does is it broadcasts to the world as one of the largest international sporting events taking place all of the good that Trinidad and Tobago is doing, we also managed to negotiate quite good advertising packages, being aware that the rest of the world would be looking on at the playing field. So we've negotiated on behalf of the government advertising packages, so Trinidad and Tobago will be highlighted all over the world during this tournament. Also, it is for 41 days, if I remember correctly, and the persons will be staying here, sitting put in Trinidad and Tobago, so that has spin-off economic effects, positive effects as well.
Let me just come in on the health part of it, Minister Cox and Minister Young. It must be noted that when these questions were asked months ago, I did say that we will be looking at the West Indies tour of England to see what they would be doing. And they are doing something very similar. What we will be following here from a health perspective is that these players and their entourages will be contained in one location. It must be noted that the games are only being played in two locations, Queen's Park Oval and the Brian Lara Stadium in Turuba. It must be emphasized, no spectators will be allowed in the ground. So the chance of spread is virtually eliminated, minimized. It is a made-for-television product, and all products and guidelines for arrivals, venues, activities, equipment are in place. So I just want to give the country the assurance that we did pay attention, as we said, to the protocols being developed by the ICC, EBC, and West Indies Cricket of the tour of West Indies to England. So far, that seems to have gone off well, and now we're in a position with that learning experience to have the CPL come off here and all the attendant spin-off benefits to the country. Thank you.
Well, while we're on CPL, there's a question from Prior, AZP News, and it is, if someone in the CPL contingent is test positive for COVID-19, does the government offer treatment free of charge, or does the CPL cover the medical cost? I believe this is for the CMO.
So I mean, basically, in terms of treatment in the medical system in Trinidad, if anybody has any acute illness or infectious disease illness, the only two facilities we're able to offer treatment at this point for COVID-19 are the Cuba facility and the Cora facility, and it would be made available for any positive cases that we have from anyone arriving into the country, regardless of nationality. So those are the areas that we have designated.
We have someone on the line.
Soini Gray from Guardian Media. Apologies if this question was asked before, but the back and forth with the tech, I can't listen as closely as I'd want to. The U.S. ICE, Immigration and Customs Control, has issued a warning that if your school is moving to an almost online exclusive teaching model, then your student visa will be invalidated and you would have to return home. Does the government or the Ministry of Education or National Security have a number of how many students may be affected, or have they begun engagements to get that sort of information?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, you did put in your proviso up front that you weren't listening because you were having technical difficulties, etc. That question was asked repeatedly. In fact, my colleague, Minister Diyal Singh, asked me 3 times, saying, look, I'm going to ask again to clarify. So we have answered that question. We are in contact with the United States government. Students do not need to panic because, as you quite rightly said, it's only if your classes are 100% online that you may find yourself in some difficulties. But we will continue the conversations with the United States government, and we are looking at expanding our ability to do state quarantine and state supervised quarantine to take into the category of returning persons the students who may also be having found themselves in some difficulty.
Minister Cox, I just want to go back to one question, because the answer could be possibly misinterpreted to mean that we are making exemptions for the CPL. The question was asked about the treatment of anybody. Let me remind, and we have said it from this platform many times, Cabinet took a decision in June 2019 that any infectious disease, regardless of nationality, will be treated in the public healthcare system. I want to reiterate that, so the usual mischief makers don't go out and say we are making exceptions for CPL. It's a wonderful thing where that cabinet note, I think it's paragraph 6, spoke about all, after it listed infectious diseases like measles, HIV, and so on. The last part of paragraph 6 said specifically, and all infectious diseases, people will be allowed free testing and free emergency treatment and free treatment for infectious diseases. So no exception is being made for CPL. It is encompassed under that cabinet note of June 2019.
Thank you. Minister Young, I want to go back because there's a question. Does the Ministry of National Security have a website that foreign nationals can register online if they want to return home?
Yeah. I understand the question. Thank you very much, Minister Cox. As we've emphasized throughout since the 23rd of March, and I'll use the opportunity to emphasize again, at this stage we're only allowing nationals back in. We really have to repatriate all of our nationals who are seeking to return to Trinidad and Tobago before we reach to the non-national side, unless they fall into the category of the oil and gas sector in the majority, because we need to keep our energy sector going. The answer is please send your application for exemption to the same travel exemption, so the same incoming. We are going to categorize it. We're not going to just discard your application. So it's travel exemption at mns.gov.tt. So those non-nationals, you can, but understand that it is very unlikely until we've brought back all of our nationals, we'll be able to deal with your applications, unless you fall into the energy sector category of coming here to work, which we've been working out with the energy sector.
Thank you very much. We have a question. I think we have Newsday online.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Janelle D'Souza from Newsday. Again, as I said, there were several technical difficulties
That's
today.
all right.
But the Minister Young mentioned a new hotel as a quarantine facility. Where would that be located, and how many people would that be able to hold?
Okay, thank you very much. It is up near to the Piarco airport, and it really depends. What we do it is really by number of rooms. So my recollection is we're looking at an additional 70 rooms, but understand now as we bring persons back, we're looking at families as well. So families would fall into a category where they would take one room, but it may be up to 5 persons, 2 parents and 3 children. So I think it expands by 70 additional rooms, but it also gives us the ability, which is why when we wrote to nationals in Canada and nationals in the United Kingdom, Europe and the Middle East overnight, we asked them please indicate whether they'd be prepared to pay for state supervised quarantine. And if some people take that up, it means that we can expand the number of exemptions of persons coming home from those areas.
There's a follow-up question to the CMO. It concerns the youth competition. Does the CMO consider children to be anyone under 18? And messages have been coming in from coaches who want that cleared up. CMO?
So it's not what I consider. It's a legal definition, and I asked for my Ministry of Health legal officer to confirm, and they have confirmed to me that 18 and under is considered a child based on the legislation.
Okay, thank you. Is the government looking into facilitating outgoing flights to persons stranded here in TNT and want to return home?
Okay, so what we've been doing, Minister Cox, in fact, up to this morning, I was communicating with the High Commissioner for Canada and last night with the United States government through their U.S. Embassy here in Trinidad. The various governments have been asking permission and doing it, and that is what has been taking place. So at this stage, when there are flights available, also with Canada, there may be some spaces available. These flights were really put on to Canada as well to get the farm workers from Trinidad who want to go up to work in Canada. But it is something that we're looking at as well. Again, that is going to be guided by the ability for us to bring back nationals here to Trinidad. But we are aware that there's students who want to go back up to university. I mean, I would just offer a bit of personal caution there. You don't know how things are going to unfold. One of the conditions that we're putting in the exemptions for persons leaving Trinidad and Tobago, and I made it very clear to the team yesterday, you must acknowledge when you're granted, everybody will be granted an exemption to leave Trinidad and Tobago, but you're going to be asked to provide a written acknowledgement that when you leave, when you're ready to return, the borders continue to remain closed as they are now. There's no guarantee that you'd be allowed back into Trinidad and Tobago at that point in time, and you'd be subject to the government's border control management at that time, and there would be others who may be ahead of you that would have to come in before you. So just be aware that when you leave, you are going to be asked to provide this written acknowledgement that you acknowledge there's no guarantee of your return at the time you want to, and you would be subject to the government's border management.
Minister Cox, may I just add to what Minister Young is saying, a cautionary note to parents of children going back to university in certain countries where healthcare is not like in Trinidad and Tobago, where it's free and accessible. Parents of children going back to university, please ensure that you purchase an excellent health insurance plan for your children. Because if you get COVID or anything else in those countries and you do not have health insurance, your chances of getting proper treatment are limited. So it's a cautionary word to parents. Please purchase the appropriate health insurance for your children going back to university.
Okay, there's a question to the CMO. When is the entertainment industry, namely party promoters, DJs, music artists, sound system owners, club owners, party boat owners, bar security personnel, when are they going to get to apply their honest trade like everyone else? Can someone in authority say? They said that they have been patient, but they would like to know what is happening at this point in time. CMO?
So I can speak to the public health issues. I don't know if any of the ministers can answer in terms of when, but we left that group of persons to last because, as you know, in those particular instances, there are very close contact of individuals. Persons are in extremely close contact in those scenarios. They are small confined spaces, so they are at great risk of spread of infectious disease generally. The Ministry of Health, in our continuing reports to the Minister of National Security as well as Minister of Health, has not made that recommendation, or we have left that recommendation for later on. So no definite time frame from my side.
I mean, here as Minister of Health, because it is the Ministry of Health's team that advises and works with the Minister of National Security, and that eventually advises the Prime Minister. All of these industries are honest people, and we acknowledge that. When you look at what is happening around the world, the industries that are being shut down again is not because they are dishonest or honest. It has to do with certain industries, unfortunately, lend themselves to be in their own epicenters of new outbreaks. Unfortunately, it is being noticed around the world in social settings, bars, restaurants, nightclubs, party boats. We acknowledge that these are honest pastimes, that these are honest businessmen. So it has nothing to do with how honest they are. We acknowledge the honesty. But you also have to pay attention to what is happening around the world. And when you have to shut down a whole economy because one part of that economy is problematic, the ripple effects are huge. So we are not punishing anybody. We are not saying that you don't matter. We are not saying that you are dishonest. What we are saying is that to protect the gains that we have made as a country, as we reopen the economy, and the whole economy is being reopened, we have no choice but to pay attention to that potential epicenter that could come from one industry. These are very hard decisions to make. We empathize with bar owners, we empathize with DJs, party boats, but simply at this point in time, we have to be ultra careful so that the entire country doesn't have to shut down again, which will bring with it a whole new set of problems, a whole new set of restrictions. So let's go Let's go steady and sure with this. Thank you very much, Minister Cox.
Thank you very much. We are out of time. I just want to apologize for viewing and listening audiences and members of the media. Actually, I understand that the problem stemmed from one of our service providers, and we hope, well, Monday this will be rectified. We've come to the end of today's virtual media conference, and do remember that the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Communications are your only credible sources of government information on COVID-19. And as we go, please let us remember that we are still in the midst of a global pandemic, and we cannot be lulled into a sense of complacency. The Pan-American Health Organization reported that the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic has shifted to the region of the Americas. PAHO said COVID-19 has now spread to all 54 countries and territories in the Americas, and the US and Brazil combined account for 75% of all cases and 74% of all deaths currently reported in the region. Put simply, COVID-19 remains at our doorsteps. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have managed to keep the curve flat, but the risk of emergence remains unless the countries near to us also flatten their curves. Now more than ever, we need to observe public health guidelines. And even as we prepare for general elections, we would like to appeal to everyone campaigning to remember to wear your mask over your nose and mouth when out in public. Please keep your distance from others. It is recommended that you stay at least 6 feet apart. Stay home if you are ill. Do remember to wash your hands often with soap and water or use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. And if you cough, do so into a tissue or into the crook of your elbow and avoid touching your face. Please let us not squander the success we have had so far. This is our new normal, and we must adjust to our new way of life. I am Donna Cox, Minister of Communications, and thank you for joining us today as the government continues its efforts to keep the curve flat and beat COVID-19. Stay safe, save lives. May God bless Trinidad and Tobago.